Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast with Kate Riga. This is our first episode of 2024, second week, but first episode. We had a bye week, the first Wednesday of 2024, but we're back, and we've got a fair amount to talk about. There's a relatively packed news environment, which is I feel like a little different than what it was at the end of last year when everything seemed to sort of be slowing down and wasn't totally clear what was going on in the news. That's sort of expected at the end of a calendar year, but as we know, it's not always the case because news, if it ever operated on some sort of predictable schedule, it doesn't do it anymore. So we're going to jump right into it because what we have seen over the last, yesterday, but building to that over the last few days is this immunity case hearing for former President Trump. And before we get into it, I want to mention something that our executive editor has mentioned a number of times, and it really is important to keep this in mind as a way to frame or bracket what this hearing was about, because there were a lot of headlines of people saying, oh, the judges weren't hearing any of it, went badly for Trump, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is the claim that Trump's lawyers were making here, certainly the claim in its totality, and it was a totalizing claim, is just an absurd claim. And we can say that a lot of things that Trump claims are absurd, but I guarantee you that whoever the quasi adults are in Trump land would have told you, if you could speak to them privately, there's no way we're going to win on this. Absolutely no way. It's a delay tactic. So the real question here is how much it serves them in delay terms. So keep that in mind as Kate and I go through this. That's what this is about. I'm sure that Trump wouldn't mind if somehow either the D.C. Circuit panel first or eventually the Supreme Court on appeal said, "Oh yeah, believe it or not, you are totally immune from prosecution from any criminal infraction forever for anything you do while you are president." But that was never going to happen. This is about delay. So, Kate, let's just kick it off. What happened yesterday in this hearing, and what did we learn, if anything?
So, like you said, everyone particularly expects this argument not to fly at the DC circuit because this panel has two Biden judges on it and then one kind of historically Trump friendly George Bush senior appointee. But, so you would think the ideological numbers are such that it's kind of set in stone. Now, I would say the hearing went a little bit differently than I expected, the oral arguments, because the judges, I don't want to say were credulous of the argument, because I think in particularly they kind of saved their most withering reaction to the crux of the argument, the kind of very sweeping immunity claims. But they did spend kind of considerable time fiddling with this jurisdiction question, which was raised in an amicus brief. The idea of whether they can kind of take on this question at this point. This group in particular says that it's a post-conviction question, that of immunity. So, that the merits trial kind of has to conclude before it's appropriate for them to talk about this. And they did spend a lot of time kind of going back and forth with each lawyer on that question. Also, another point came up, which Trump's attorney, John Sauer, was really kind of eager about, which was his whole argument is that the immunity wouldn't cover personal acts, which is kind of how he gets around the Bill Clinton, Paula Jones stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of pushing, let's look back on the indictment and sort out what are official acts versus what are personal acts, which would obviously kick it back down to the district court and make the district court kind of litigate an indictment, kind of go charge by charge type thing. Not that I think that they'll do those things, but it did make it less of kind of a clear shot of like, this is a stupid argument. We're dispensing with it quickly. We're going to get back on track, and a little bit more muddied, I think, for people who aren't that familiar with the finer points of the arguments. But all that being said, it was pretty clear that even the Trumpiest of the judges was not super impressed by the arguments. She had this one line that Josh Kavinsky and I kind of it took us aback, which was she described it as, quote, paradoxical to say that his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed allows him to violate criminal law. So even the one who's kind of most inclined to agree with him here seemed pretty skeptical. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you had Florence Pan, a Biden appointee, with the line that seemed to get the most play from the hearing, which was when she compared this to a president ordering SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, and that under Trump team's arguments, that president would not be in any danger of criminal prosecution at all. So that's kind of where we ended. They didn't talk about timing at all, which, as you say, we were almost like most interested in hearing about. That question will be answered on its own, when they hand down a decision. And so far, they've done everything in their power to kind of move really quickly. So if that holds, then we're going to get a ruling from them kind of more quickly than we'd usually expect from, a federal appeals court.
Now, with the one part of this argument, or maybe step down version of this argument, it sounds a little like the litigation from, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago, I lose track, with Mark Meadows, where he was trying to make this argument of, well, when I did that, I wasn't just some guy, I was the president's chief of staff. And so I'm not sure it's not the same legal doctrines, but sort of something on the order of like qualified immunity, the way if a police officer hits someone, let alone shoots someone, it's not just as an ordinary person on the street. They're given some deference. Well, you're a cop. We asked you to do all these things, so we don't assume that it was a bad act if you punch someone in the face. It might be something you needed to do in your line of duty. Is that part of the question? Is it just happened that that's similar to the legal questions that came up with Mark Meadows, or is it basically the same kind of line of reasoning?
Yeah, well, it's similar. And then you have the kind of added piece of, and if it was an official act, the president needs to be impeached and convicted. And if he's not, if he resigns before, if he's acquitted, then criminal prosecution at that point is double jeopardy, is essentially the crux of the argument.
Right. So if I'm understanding this now, I would certainly assume that there is some argument that if the president, that there are lots of things the president can do, that, ordering a war strike, ordering this, ordering that the president does have some ability to say, hey, I'm president. There are a lot of decisions I have to make. You can't like analyze them the way that you would the average person. There's at least, in my non-lawyer mind, there's at least some kind of terrain there that comes into view that I can make sense of. But this idea that an impeachment trial constitutes a form of double jeopardy, or that a president needs to be impeached in order to be criminally prosecuted, to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever made any arguments like this ever. And I can't imagine what the conceivable basis of it at all was. That part of the argument treated that way? That part seems to me ridiculous.
Yeah. The judges seem to feel similarly with Michelle Childs in particular, who our listeners might remember from making the short list for the seat that Ketanji Brown Jackson has now on the Supreme Court. But I think it was her who made this point of an impeachment is fundamentally political, right? That's why you can impeach a president for doing something that's not necessarily a crime because
Right.
it's just a different standard. And it kind of goes to
And
the
there's
the
no
con
judicial review or anything like
right.
that.
And I mean,
It's
it's in the
yeah,
hands of politicians, right? So I mean, we call it a trial and we call it a conviction, but it is fundamentally a different thing. There's no judge. It's just different. So they got into that a lot. And the problem is here is there's just no precedent, obviously, because everything Trump is doing is unprecedented. So the trickiness is, I think, you've got the judges being much more careful than I think they would in kind of other Trump cases because they're very, very aware that the precedent they're setting now is going to kind of rule the day for all the presidents to come, which is
hmm
why I think they were maybe sounded a little more circumspect or a little more credulous of arguments that in another context they might just be more inclined to be like, well, that's stupid, kind of moving right along.
right,
And also there's this thing I think where some people get really mad after oral arguments because they feel like, well, the judges didn't kind of succinctly convey the case to the listeners, right? They didn't give a clear sense of what this case is about. And like I get that. And I think we're a little bit trained to feel that way, especially because we're in a Supreme Court era where the liberals are nearly always just going to dissent, right? So everything they're doing is kind of in that public educating, speaking and writing for posterity kind of
right, right,
posture.
right,
But fundamentally, like oral arguments are not necessarily to educate the listeners on the case. They are so the judges can kind of get their questions answered that weren't answered in the briefs. So I think some people were really disappointed with these oral arguments. I'm a little more of the camp of like, this is all new terrain. I think it's okay that they want to ask them some questions and like press on some points, even if they were raised by the bad faith Trump camp, and maybe
right,
just kind of keep our powder dry until the decision comes out and how quickly the decision comes out. Cause that's, I think, is almost the biggest window for criticism. Even if they knock down the argument, but they take like a month to do it, then you have real grounds to be pissed off. But I
right,
I don't
right.
really see that happening at this point.
Do you think there's I mean, because I'm not sure. Well, do you think there is a chance that they would pursue what you alluded to, which is this line of reasoning that it's just premature? You appeal your verdict when you've been convicted, and you haven't even had the trial yet. Now it does seem to me, and again, I don't know what the standards a judge is supposed to apply in this case. But this does sound different in the sense that we're not talking about a reviewing a decision the judge made in how the trial was conducted or anything like that, nothing internal to the trial. You're talking about, should this trial even be possible since since he's claiming immunity. So, but and I kind of don't. I would be surprised. I would certainly be disappointed if they went that path. Not that it would be damaging, so to speak, because they can just do it later, but you should be able to knock this one out pretty quickly, I think, just because, as we've discussed, the basic argument is just specious.
Yeah, I think they're not inclined to do that probably primarily because both parties don't want them to. Both and they kind of brought this up. One of the judges asked the DOJ guy, John Pierce, um, they're like, wouldn't it behoove you for us to kind of dismiss this on the grounds that we don't have jurisdiction, and to kind of get right back into the merits? And he's like, well, I'm not really sure that would save time in the end anyway, because this question is going to have to be addressed at some point. And also, like we want this decided correctly and blah blah blah, and it's an important question to raise. So the fact that both parties are like, no, we want you to decide this now, I think does also like have quite a bit of weight there, because you'd have to have the judges going rogue and kind of being like, no, never mind. And then you also have the point that due to that, it's not in their briefs. This was only raised in like one amicus brief. um I mean, and it just shows you kind of the power of the argument that one group kind of raised this argument, and it kind of was a repeated point of contention during the hearings. But at this point, I would just kind of be surprised, and I do think they're being cognizant of speed, and they know that to go through all this and then to be like, we're going to punt this question until a potential conviction would be like, oh my god, there, that is just the least time effective way to deal with this question.
Right, right, right. So, is what else did anything else, as I said in the beginning, this is really all a delay tactic. I don't think any, regardless of what the DC circuit does, it seems almost inconceivable to me that they could get a majority on the Supreme Court to um, agree with any of Trump's arguments here. And I think I'm on solid ground in this case, thinking that's not just like, thinking the best. This would be such a total overturning of just sort of the basic concept of what the American state is. It would be shocking. But is there anything else that came up that in those hearings that changed some idea we had, or is worth discussing, or is anything beyond just kind of random questions that these three were interested in asking?
I think we mostly covered it. I think the one thing that kind of gives me a similar inclination to yours about the Supreme Court, even though I'm so hesitant to make any predictions with this Supreme Court. But we talked about this in a previous episode, the denying of Jack Smith's request to take the question immediately and to first kind of pipe it through the DC court. And one reason why I think they might have done that is it gives them cover to say, like, we don't think the appellate court erred in anything, so we're just going to kind of uphold them and like put the onus on the lower court and do what conservative judges love to do, which is when it behooves them to be like, we're supposed to be restrained. We're not supposed to be redoing the work of lower courts. We're just supposed to be, the kind of stopgap review of them,
Right,
which
right, right,
obviously that policy goes right out the window when they disagree with the lower court. But I've been wondering this whole time, like, why were there no liberal dissents on that? They're just
hmm
it makes me think there has to be a reason, and I wonder if it was just they know it's pretty likely the DC circuit will decide against him, and then they can just kind of uphold those findings and not contribute a whole bunch themselves, like try to keep their
right.
hands as clean as possible, knowing, asterisks, knowing they will have opportunities to bail Trump out at a further point, if that becomes necessary.
So in that scenario, when they refused to jump that stage, they weren't just saying we're not going to look at it now. In essence, they were saying we're not going to look at this ever because we're very confident what the lower court is going to do. And when that lower court ruling gets appealed, assuming it's what we assume and it's
Mhm.
rejected, that we are just going to say, nope, this looks good to us, move along, and that's it.
Either that, or if they take it themselves, just still kind of making the lower court the standard bearer here,
Right.
like that's all I mean. Just kind of trying to do as little original legwork as possible.
Right, right, right. Okay. So the next up, we have a a related but very different in many ways and really weird story, and that is about the state prosecution out of Atlanta, Georgia, brought by the district attorney of Fulton County, Fani Willis. Everybody knows about this one. This is the one with 19 different defendants. It's the one that uh, uh, Cheesebro and uh, I'm forgetting her last name, but the Kraken woman have already
Powell.
pled, yeah, pled out to that. Well, you tell us. It's so weird, but you tell us what is this?
So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution first broke the story of this filing, which is from Michael Roman, one of Trump's co-defendants, like one of the 2020 fake electors, and being represented by this defense attorney that is apparently like quite well respected within kind of Georgia legal circles. And I guess she had this big moment where she exposed that a judge was coaching prosecutors in this other unrelated case. So defense attorneys there like really love her now.
Mm-hmm.
But the crux of it is that they say Fani Willis hired this guy to, be the special prosecutor to kind of like help helm the case, and that she is romantically involved with this man. And then the way they kind of stretch it into, case harming malfeasance is to say that they went on vacation together. And so his spending money on those trips was a illegal kickback that,
Yeah.
she hired him. He's getting paid to be on this case. He's using that money to take them on these romantic vacations. And that is, that is in violation of kind of the maybe even the anti-racketeering laws in Georgia. And they say, that's grounds for the case to be dismissed, not just for, Willis and this guy to be kicked off, but for the case to be dismissed completely. So the weirdness, the squickiness around this is that in this very long document alleging this, there's no real proof of the relationship. There's no signed witness affidavits or communications between the two. And now the defense attorney here says that this guy Wade, that he is going through an acrimonious divorce in the background of all this. His divorce proceedings were sealed by the judge soon after he got this appointment to be part of the team for obvious reasons. I guess he's suddenly a person of interest and he should have a right not to have his personal stuff kind of dragged into it. So the defense attorney says that she got a bunch of documents off the docket while it was unsealed that shows proof of their relationship, proof that they traveled together, or, we don't know the specifics of this. Maybe it's like the ex-wife being aware of this relationship, but she says she has them and didn't post them as part of her document because they're sealed now, and she doesn't want to run afoul of that. And she also contests that they were sealed improperly and that, you have to have some kind of a hearing under Georgia law to do it. So she's already also in this now divorce proceeding asking them to unseal it so she can bring in the documents that she alleges proves this relationship. And then the kind of newest thing on that front is that Willis was subpoenaed in part of these divorce proceedings as well. So kind of that's where it stands now. Obviously, you had Trump immediately go crow about it on Truth Social and all his foot soldiers being like, this case is over, it's tainted, this is the end. I think back here on planet Earth, there are, two things going on here. One, if this is true, and if she did hire this guy with whom she's having a romantic relationship, who, to be clear, there were some eyebrows raised at his hiring at the time because he does not have a ton of prosecutorial experience.
That's interesting.
And definitely, and she said that her kind of explanation for that is that a lot of kind of more seasoned prosecutors didn't want the job because of the kind of MAGA world death threats that come with it, which I also think is not completely an implausible position.
Mm-hmm.
But, and she she's kind of a character in and of herself, but she made this kind of weird comment about well, he's my contemporary and you can't get young people to do this kind of thing because they're weak, and I need to be able to yell at people on my team and have them brush it off, which is okay, a very okay boomer line of discussion. But so okay, there's the fact that this is an HR nightmare, right? And also the perspective of, if this is real, what in the world were you thinking, Fani Willis? This is the biggest case of your career to date, right?
Yeah, if you
that
forget to brush your teeth one day, you're going to see it on Truth Social, basically. Yeah.
Right. That all eyes are on this, right? There's a huge amount of scrutiny. Like every single news outlet has reporters following this. This is the kind of case where you avoid the appearance of impropriety at every turn. You know, this is like the putting the peanut farm in the blind trust kind of thing. Like, and the fact that you would take this risk, and if the defense attorney is right, go on documented vacations with this guy, like, amid the trial. I mean, that is crazy. That's insane. If she did that, and it's, I almost hate saying it too, because she and every other kind of Black judge or prosecutor or witness who has been involved gets maligned times 100 by, Team Trump. It's their go-to. Like, every Black woman involved is going to be the number one kind of MAGA universe villain. But if
Yeah.
this is what she did, this was so stupid. And despite everything else, I mean, bound to give his claims some kind of credence in people's eyes that this was, improper. Okay, so that's kind of the court of public opinion side of things. And then you
Right.
have the, will this actually hurt the case, right? Like, will this get one of the big four felony cases kind of disbanded? There, I don't really see a very compelling argument for that to happen. I mean, part of it is it's certainly not good. Nothing about this is good, but it's hard to say that this kind of, like, even if you do interpret it as a kickback scheme, and I even think there are a little bit of complications to that, because, like, she has her own money. There's going to have to be some kind of proof that he was the one footing the bill for stuff to even make that argument
Hmm.
solid. But I mean, they're on the prosecution, right? It's they're both on the same side. I think it would be a little bit different if, like, there was one of them was on Trump's side and one of them's on the prosecution side, because then you're like, okay, well, that's kind of a conflict of interest.
Right.
It's a little bit harder to make that case here. And then the defense attorney for this guy, Michael Roman, also tries to kind of pile on. He didn't properly take the oath of whatever, being a prosecutor, and these kind of other technical things, which this judge in particular has already dismissed. Like, they've tried to raise this before with other people on the team, and he was like, okay, that's stupid. I'm not really going to hold with that. So it really seems like the kickback piece is the only thing that could potentially kind of get them in trouble. And also, taking this to its kind of furthest conclusion, like, the judge says, okay, this sucks, and now your entire office, the whole DA's office, is like done. You're not allowed to be on this case anymore. If that happens, per the Washington Post, the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia would pick a replacement for the DA's office, which actually is something that they've had to do with Fani Willis before, because one of these fake electors, she held like a fundraising election type event for the Democrat who would end up challenging this fake elector, for a position in Georgia. And so there he said, that's a conflict of interest. The DA's case can't go after this guy anymore. And then they, just pick another prosecutor to take
Right.
over the work. So that's
Right.
presumably what he would do in this situation. And they've already got outside lawyers kind of involved, because it's such a big sprawling case that the DA's office was already kind of working with some outside people. So it's not inconceivable to imagine that if Willis and her whole office kind of got booted, the onus just kind of shifts to this people, and presumably, they hire up some other kind of outside people to shoulder the work. But I've been reading about this a lot, and it's hard to find kind of legal experts who say, like, yeah, I think this case is over. It's much, the kind of common take is like, wow, this looks terrible. This was such an error of judgment, but it's hard to see how it changes the underlying facts of, the case that they're prosecuting.
Yeah, this is I read this, and I read the Atlanta Journal Constitution article about it and skimmed the actual filing, within an hour of it coming out, I think a couple nights ago. And so I did a post, and I had to give people a, first blush reaction to it. Even though, I'm not only not a lawyer, I'm not covering this part of what we do anymore. And what you say was kind of was my impression, that this argument about, well, this is a scheme to funnel money back to herself because, paying this guy $600,000, and usually when you pay a lawyer, it's not all going to him. He's got a law firm, and it's various people involved and everything. So with a case that goes on, if you're working full time, if a high priced lawyer in a big city is working on one case, their team is working on one case for more than a year, you can easily bill $500,000. That's not surprising at all. That this was a way to funnel money back through the vacation, like that seemed, a highly constructed argument. And then the other ones about, various kind of constitutional arguments, it did seem to me, as you said, they just know they hit the gold mine. If it's true that she's having an affair with, and I'm not sure I guess neither of them are married, so it's not an affair. It's a non-public romantic relationship. If that's true, let's just pack it up with a bunch of nonsense and kind of ship it out. And it won't matter if everybody sees that our legal arguments of harms are nonsense. It just is so discrediting to Fani Willis. Let's do it. And we're still holding back a bit because as you say, it's not that they offered no real evidence. They offered literally no evidence. They just said, we know. And with the vacations, we know. So, okay. And I guess that is not it actually does make sense of an argument. Like, I'd show you the documents, but they're under seal, and I'm an officer of the court, so I can't do that until you unseal them. It is hard to imagine a non-ridiculous lawyer would do this if there was no real evidence. And as you said, we've heard from various directions, this is a serious person. This is a respected lawyer. A respected lawyer is not going to try to deceive the court in that way. What does occur to me as at least possible is that all sorts of things are alleged in an acrimonious divorce. Not all of them are true. So it is conceivable that this is alleged. That doesn't mean it's true. But if something's alleged and if I'm your attorney and something is alleged in legal documents, I'm going to bring that up. I don't need to make the reasoning of, people say all sorts of crap in a divorce proceeding. Who knows if it's true? Someone said it. You work with it. Having said all that, it's kind of hard to imagine it's not true, because I kind of can't imagine we'd be here if this was just totally made up out of whole cloth. I also, just in the way that news works, even though Willis's office is saying, look, we're not going to debate this in the press, where you'll see what our legal filing said, there are ways to kind of communicate to reporters, no fucking way. This is totally bullshit. Never anything. So, like, I think it's true. Now, one thing that occurs to me is you've reported more on this and know more about this than I do. My understanding is that the allegation is that the relationship precedes his hiring. Is that correct? Or is that ambiguous?
I think that's right, because part of the accusation is that she hired him when they were already in a relationship, right?
Right.
Like, that was the kind of original sin of it all.
Right. Okay, so one mitigation would be, look, you're working on the kind of case of a lifetime. You're 24/7 working the case. Things happen. People start relationships, and that's not advisable. But both adults, it's ambiguous whether someone's a boss of someone else. That's one thing. But doing it when they're already in a relationship, that's, what can we say? What were you thinking? I mean, it's kind of inexplicable. Like, are you fucking kidding? I mean, I don't mean a double entendre there. I mean, are you kidding? Like, how could this happen? And if anything, if this is true, I'm a little surprised that it hasn't come out already or been alluded to. A lot of people work on a case like this, right? This isn't like Fani Willis isn't like writing up the briefs and kind of interviewing tertiary witnesses. This is DA of Fulton County. That's a big jurisdiction. They process tons of cases. A lot of people work here. And obviously, a romantic relationship can be conducted pretty privately, depending on how careful you are. But going on vacations, not really. Like, wow, Fanny and Wade are both gone. That's weird that they're both going on vacation at the same time. How strange, you know what I mean? It's just, it's kind of hard to figure. So it's just one of these things where it kind of, we always talk about, the unpredictable things in this crazy election/trial year. And we often talk about, dramatic new legal facts. One of the two candidates drops dead. All these crazy things can happen. This is one of those crazy things, but wow. I couldn't have even have speculated about this one. I would have sooner. I don't know what sooner. It's just so crazy.
I know. I mean, I also, going back to your point of like, it's odd that this didn't come out yet, especially because, I mean, she's not like a pure lawyer. She's like a politician lawyer, I mean, this is a big role that she has. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I would expect that she is probably kind of gunning for something, a position of even higher prominence, that this was like could be considered kind of a big career stepping stone for her, especially if she convicts him. Um, and in that kind of atmosphere, it is inherently competitive, right? I mean, she is getting this position over other people who want this position, who want the kind of gravitas that come with handling one of the biggest legal cases of our time right now. And all of that you would think would create an atmosphere where it wouldn't be pure collegiality, it wouldn't just be kind of people who don't want to rat out their friend and coworker. And that has struck me odd from the beginning, of like that this defense attorney kind of has to rely so solely on these sealed divorce proceedings, because you would think that if this was going on kind of in as plain view as she asserts, that at the very least, even if you couldn't find anyone with a grudge against Fani Willis, she is a prominent Black woman, that's hard to imagine under any circumstances, much less one where she's involved in these very kind of like partisan fights. She's seen as a big Trump enemy. But you would also think that there would be people who would say, even if they're kind of aligned with her on everything else, who would be like, this is bad. Like,
Not
this is a
okay. Yeah,
weird
not
thing for you to
okay.
be
Yeah.
doing, and you should be stopped from doing it, who would be kind of willing to sign their name to something. So I do find it a little strange that, like you say, it's taken this long to come out, and that there isn't a stampede of people, at the very least, kind of a stampede of like right-wing prosecutors from elsewhere in the state who are like, I've been hearing this on the grapevine for forever, kind of thing. So I don't know. I do think you got to take a little bit of a wait posture, like see what their filing says, how she could possibly kind of defend herself from this. But I agree with you that it seems unlikely at this juncture, even though this is kind of coming from like a bad faith guy, that this is just spun out of whole cloth. Because you would expect, if that was true, for her to say, we'll respond in the court filing to this disgusting and baseless smear or something like that.
The one thing about Fani Willis, she, like any politician and high profile prosecutor. She's got a lot of enemies. She's also got a lot of friends,
Mhm.
and more than friends, she's got a lot of admirers in this sense that I was certainly told um, when she took on this case, when she brought this case, that a lot of Republicans in the state, like people poo-pooed it, like all anything against Trump gets poo-pooed. But basically what I'm trying to convey is, again, this was conveyed to me that a lot of Republicans in the state would have known this is serious because she's serious. You don't screw around with her. She's very smart and she gets results. Doesn't mean you're a fan of hers, you're going to support her, but people take her very seriously. And that was one of the factors sort of animating a lot of things within the Republican Party in Georgia. And let's remember one thing about the Republican Party in Georgia. The Republican Party in Georgia is under pretty non-Trump management. Not anti-Trump exactly. Brian Kemp, the governor, was unlike Raffensperger and a couple other, and the guy who worked with him, the sort of the ballot administrator, who really became pretty anti-Trump just because they were brought into the whole, the blackmail and find me the votes and stuff like that. Brian Kemp took this different line. Trump went totally against him, came up with a candidate to try to run him out of office, failed, did not get pulled into, for lack of a better word, the MSNBC circuit, but also did not do the things Trump wanted and did not throw Trump a lifeline. And that makes the Georgia GOP a little different from other Republican parties. And let's consider it that Brian Kemp, and look, I don't want to valorize the guy. He basically made his career on vote suppression, kind of purging ballot rolls and all the kind of stuff that came up in his first run for governor, when, if I'm recalling this correctly, he was Secretary of State. So he was vote administrator, you know, during his own election, all that kind of stuff. Having said that, he is one of the very, very few elected Republicans in this country who has completely gone to bat against Trump and lived to tell about it. All those people who voted for impeachment, the second impeachment, they're all gone. I think they're literally all gone. They all had to retire or they got primaried or whatever. Most of same in the Senate, but Trump went after him and he failed. So anyway, the Fani Willis thing is just inscrutable and profoundly weird because it's not the worst thing in the world what she did, but it may be the stupidest thing in the world that she did, right? I mean, people do worse things, but like, did you think this was gonna fly?
And in continuation of this theme of people doing inscrutably bizarre things, we can neatly segue into the Lloyd Austin debacle, who is the Secretary of Defense, who has kind of like created the most unnecessary negative news cycle for himself and the administration for similarly just baffling reasons, which is basically he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So he, on December 22nd, had to go in, go under general anesthesia to get the surgery, all of which he did without telling anyone. Biden didn't know
So
about that either.
Okay, so that I wasn't th I wasn't aware of that part until today. I had been under the impression that the initial surgery was kind of done by the book, the handoff and all that kind of stuff, but apparently not. It was
No.
okay.
So and then it started off this, like, weird chain of reactions where, like, a few kind of aides knew that he was going in for this surgery, but they didn't tell the White House. They didn't tell his kind of second in command, and then when they did tell her, they keep in mind she's vacationing in Puerto Rico at this time, and she's told that she's gonna have to kind of take over if there's a crisis, but even at that juncture, she's not told why. She doesn't know what's going on with him either. And at the time, she's offers to come back to Washington, and they're like, "No, he's fine. He can kind of run things from his hospital room." And then there's a second cycle, which is that he has complications from the surgery and has to go back in and is hospitalized for like a week. And that's when this news emerged with that kind of second burst that Biden didn't know about that either. And that only kind of heard about this stuff in the days after. And then it was all kind of inflamed because this gets out. They put out kind of a statement about he's doing well, right? He's recovering well, but still wouldn't say what was going on. And then it's only in these kind of, last really day or two that they fully came out and told everybody what he was in there for, what he's recovering from. And it's just like, baffling. It's baffling. I mean, it's a kind of thing where when I first saw this story, I was wondering, is it something embarrassing? Like, is it some kind of elective surgery that he doesn't want to, like, hey, Mr. President, I'm getting a nose job kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then you find out it's this, pretty serious thing that he had to totally go under full anesthesia for, which is like the by the book time that if he was the president, that he would probably give the vice president, sign a form to
Yeah,
hand
you
over
do.
power.
When presidents have had surgeries, and this happened with Reagan, and obviously not just when he was shot, but happened with Reagan, it's happened with other people. It's happened a number of times. So yes, it's a formal process.
Right. And you would think at the very least that he would kind of tell his number two, hey, this is going on. I'm going to be under for a few hours. Like, and then shoot the White House an email, like, let them know. Um, so the way that this has kind of been dealt with since is that I thought this captured it well. This is like a White House spokesperson who said, it's not good. It's certainly not good, which is why we want to make sure it doesn't happen again, which I kind of think is the right posture to take here. Like, this was ridiculous and stupid. And I think it's good that I'm sure like Pentagon officials are probably getting yelled at by White House people and like, you put us in this for no reason at all. And now they're doing all kinds of, every department send us your procedures for when a head person has to be absent and what you're going to do. And I think that's all good. It's so stupid and so kind of like, I get it if he on a human level, like, doesn't want the whole world to know that he has cancer and that he's dealing with it. Like, I get that, but then you don't become Secretary of Defense. Like, that's the exchange you make for this huge, powerful position is you have to give up some of your privacy concerns. All that being said, Biden said he's not gonna fire him. Um, I think that's right too. Like, this strikes me as the kind of thing that's so stupid that you make sure you say you are absolutely never doing this again. Like, from now on, you are letting the White House know when you get a teeth cleaning, and like, you ream him out and kind of ream out everybody else and say we're not having another news cycle about this. And then I think you move on. And I actually think it's a demonstration of like, I think it mostly comes from Biden's loyalty to his cabinet members, but I do think that is a little bit of a demonstration of like maturation from Democrats in terms of you don't have to respond to the right wing bait. Like, it is bad faith. And they are, of course, they're going to say this is impeachable. He should be fired. While, the Trump cabinet was like 12 of the biggest clowns you'd ever met who were like doing all kinds of malfeasance before, during, and after.
Right.
So from that perspective, I think Biden's doing the right thing. I think they shouldn't be fired. I think they should like do all these memos about proper procedure, and then they should move on. And then if reporters keep bringing it up, be like, yeah, he took full, Austin took full accountability. Biden appreciates that. He has faith in the job that he's doing. We're moving on. And that's that.
Yeah. It's funny. A couple things. One, for our listeners, Secretary of Defense is not like other cabinet secretaries in this sense, and not just because, well, war's a bigger deal than whatever they do at the Commerce Department that no one knows what it even is. The key is under something called the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which was a reorganization of the entire U.S. military establishment, and I believe 1986, they created a system where the actual chain of command, how the orders get ordered, get made, president to Secretary of Defense to combatant commander. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is actually not part of the chain of command in that sense. He's the statutory advisor, military advisor to the president. Secretary of the Army, Chief of Staff of the Army, so the civilian head of the Army, the uniformed head of the Army, they're not in that chain of command. The combatant commanders are head of CENTCOM, Central Command, that runs the Middle East. Pacific Command, those have a general or an admiral who's in charge. So not having the Secretary of Defense around is a non-trivial issue. That Biden can't just call up the guy on the ground in in Qatar or Bahrain or whatever and say, hey, that other guy's not around. Let's work directly. That's not how it works. There's like a real legal issue here. So that is one thing. What I'm a little taken aback by, and this I actually only learned this in this conversation. I had been under the impression that the initial surgery was done more by the books, that everyone was notified, and that had made me considerably more sympathetic because our understanding is he has a surgery. Like a week after the surgery or something like that, he has some major complications. He's in terrible pain. They rush him to the hospital. He's in the ICU. Who knows? He may not have been. You're in horrible pain. You're not like, I got to call the president. It's whatever. And they notified the joint staff basically immediately the next morning. And maybe this was, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning or something like so. So that happened immediately. And the documents were signed to do that handover. So the Deputy Secretary of Defense, she was in charge at that point. They had done the paperwork that she now was the acting Secretary of Defense. The problem was she didn't know that, which you want her to know, right? Just I don't know. She wants to kind of do a ketamine session. I don't know, right? She needs to stay on top of things. And they didn't tell the service secretaries and the chief of staff of the Army. And they also didn't tell the White House. That is much less than ideal. But again, I saw it in the context of the sort of the emergency, kind of thing. And so and one of the reports that the reason it took a couple days for the White House to be notified there was that his chief of staff, Austin's chief of staff, was out sick and that he sort of dropped the ball. Like, okay, like sort of comedy of errors, everything going wrong. But the fact that it wasn't done the first time when it was a planned thing, not like done on an emergency basis, that's just a screw up. And I still believe what I believed before, which was I just see there's nothing to be gained by firing him over this. Pretty sure he's not going to do it again, right? Yeah. And that's where it is. Although, as I said, even during this conversation, it seems more serious or a bigger screw up than I realized, I think, when I wrote about it yesterday, because I didn't realize that the planned thing had also not been that they'd basically kept it secret. And that's a whole different thing because, again, a lot of my thinking was he's rushed to the ICU in the middle of the night. There, blah, 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 blah. The other thing with this, which is an interesting question, like, I'm not sure the defense secretary needs to tell us what his medical condition is, as long as it doesn't immediately affect his ability to do the job. He's not the president. We don't need to, I don't think we need to or necessarily have a right to know, the sort of the nitty-gritty details of what he's dealing with. I mean, I'm sure some people disagree with that. That's fine. But it is different from the president, where you need to say, like, we need to know that you're, good to go for years into the future, blah, 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 because you're this kind of the constitutional linchpin of the whole of the whole system. But certainly, everybody needs to know if the Secretary of Defense isn't going to be available. That's just, it couldn't be more obvious. And yes, the whole story is very weird.
And, I don't at all want to make light of it from his position. Like, it's horrible, right? Everything about it is like horrible. I was really hoping that it was going to be some funny elective surgery that would have some like comedic value, but this
like
just
a toe
sucks.
extension or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the other piece of it is also like, it's not like prostate cancer is rare or like unheard of. I mean, how many senators have we had announce that they have it, or at least members of Congress, even in this past term? I think there have been 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So it does make it a little more baffling in terms of it's not like maybe a degenerative disease that would put his ability to like do the job into question. I think if it was the kind of thing that I agree with you. I don't think he had to make it public, but if he did, if they put out some statement like he's battling this and
it's not like
we're gonna jump through all the hoops and everything, I think people would be like, oh, that's really sad. Like, we're praying for you, and that would kind of be like the extent of it.
Yeah, no, I think that is 100% right, and it just does. I don't know, and I'm not sure this really has anything to do with it, but it's worth noting that I think he was a 4-star general.
Yeah, that's
He's
right.
not a I mean, he's career military and a
Mm-hmm.
senior general. I don't know if just how high ranking, but I think pretty high ranking, like one of those guys who had one of the combatant commands or something like
Yeah,
that, or
he's
was maybe
4-star. Mm-hmm.
right. So maybe was, kind of high level on the Joint Staff or something like that. It's very weird. And I think our verdict on
Yep.
that.
So that's the Lloyd Austin and Fani Willis kind of competing for the just bonehead decision award of the week.
Pretty much.
And we're gonna wrap up here talking a little bit about our initial caucuses, which, if you can believe it, election season is like almost really super officially upon us. The Iowa caucus is on Monday. We're not expecting any surprises there. To do a little like curtain reveal, I'll be covering it with editor Nicole LaFond, and our kind of like, when we have to pull out some like big long analytical pieces, will be in the case of A, Trump losing, or B, Trump not winning by double digits. Like, that's the kind of race we're looking at. If Trump didn't win by like 30 points, that would be the shock. I think there's basically no chance that happens, much less that he loses. And really, the more exciting of these kind of initial contests will be in New Hampshire, because that's the only place where anyone has gained any ground on Trump at all, even though the amount of ground even is kind of up in the air. And by this, we're talking about Nikki Haley, who has made inroads in New Hampshire by some measures, though it's not at all clear. This week, we got 2 polls. A CNN University of New Hampshire one released Tuesday had Trump leading Haley 39 to 32%. Good for her. But then a USA Today, Boston Globe, Suffolk University poll released the same day had Trump up 46% to her 26%. So quite a range. The 538 average right before we started recording has him at 42 and her at 30, which again is still a horse race kind of compared to everything else we've got going. But you know, that's kind of the place where if there's going to be any quote unquote kind of shaking up of this race, that's where it's going to happen. And now I think the bad news for Haley there is that New Hampshire is super, idiosyncratic in a way that even if she kind of pulls off the win there, doesn't necessarily bode that well for her path to come. Like New Hampshire is particularly, doesn't have the same like kind of evangelical fervor of most of Trump's base. I think 39% of the state's electorate are quote unquote undeclared voters, so they can vote in either primary. There's also just kind of a big like independent streak in the state, and they have a history of kind of either reviving dead campaigns or boosting someone from obscurity to the top spot. You think you've got Gary Hart in 84, Clinton kind of storming into second place in 92, and then McCain obviously in 2000 and 2008. So
And
all those,
actually, Hillary Clinton,
yeah.
that wait, in 2008, I'm pretty certain I got this right. I'm remembering this right. Obama won Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a week of like, oh my God, the sky is falling from the heavens. How, this is, no one could have imagined. And then Hillary won New Hampshire. And the idea was he had so much momentum. He was going to storm into New Hampshire, and then it was just done. And she won New Hampshire. Now, obviously, he got the nomination, but that set the terms of everything that came later, which was that it was a slugfest all the way, just every single. So yes, there is that thing, as you said. It's everything about the New Hampshire system, the electorate, New Hampshire used to be very conservative. It's not very conservative anymore. It's generally a blue state at the presidential level, although always close. But even when it was conservative, it was not conservative in the sense that the modern GOP, and certainly not the Trump GOP, is heavily evangelical, Southern, all that kind of stuff. There's the matter you said of that, basically anybody can vote. So there's all those things, but I think the next up is South Carolina, where Nikki Haley was governor, and Trump is like a million points ahead of her, and no one thinks that's gonna change. So, but all that, if she did do surprisingly well, whatever that means, that you could have Trump having to work for a while at securing the nomination, even if he, because most of the GOP primaries and caucuses are winner take all, so kind of doesn't matter how close someone gets, but still it keeps the conversation within the GOP. The one thing the only thing I can think that is like adds a touch of uncertainty into my mind is that these races are so uncontested that in a place like Iowa, like, are a ton of Trumpers going to really, show up at the caucuses? Like, why? He's already nominee. I mean, obviously that applies to just as much everybody else, but it does.
An added piece on Iowa. It's expected to be the coldest Iowa caucus in history. It's going to be 7 degrees. So they're going to have to weather some adversity.
Maybe no one will win. Maybe no one will show up. Right. I mean, why would you show up? He's the nominee. So that does, that does introduce, some weirdness. I mean, you talked about, like reviving dead campaigns. This is more like, one of those stories when they like animate a golem, right? These campaigns were never alive, so it's not even quite like that. But for obvious partisans and patriotic reasons, I would love there to be a surprise of some sort. But I don't know. Nikki Haley, the is she the most boring of the candidates? She's got to be pretty close. I mean, at least DeSantis is like deeply weird.
Yeah.
Like that's interesting. And Chris Christie is Chris Christie.
Mm-hmm.
Vivek Ramaswamy is clearly a psychopath. I mean, that's good for
Yeah.
something, right?
Like,
But
two things on this. One of which is, in addition to everything we've said about New Hampshire, Biden is not on the ballot there because, we'll remember kind of Team Biden said we're not doing the states in their normal order this year, which both was to address this kind of long-term concern that the earliest primary states are super, super white and don't include, kind of the backbone of the Democratic base. And then also because we know that Biden in his run was not doing very well until he hit South Carolina and states that kind of have more diverse electorates. But he won't be on the ballot, which kind of contributes more to this sense of New Hampshire is just a weird place, which is like if you're a Democrat who loves participating in these kind of early election activities as Iowans and New Hampshireites do like to do. I mean, if you're going to vote, if you're like a Biden person and you're going to vote in this, you're not going to vote for Trump, right? You're going to vote for Haley. So that's just another added piece. And then also, speaking of Chris Christie, in New Hampshire, he's like drawing 12% in most of these polls or somewhere around there, which obviously Haley's going to need if she's going to beat Trump there. But he keeps saying he is only going to drop out if he doesn't have a good showing in New Hampshire. So he is also, we're reaching the point, the kind of water's edge of the like, thanks for your service, Chris Christie. Like, I don't actually think he ever really did what he said he was going to and be the big Trump
not really. Yeah,
antagonist.
low energy.
Yeah, and kind of aimless and ended up attacking other people. And it's all just the self-aggrandizement of it all really seemed to eclipse any like effectiveness from him. But at the very least, if you're doing this for the reasons you say you're doing this and not just to get a permanent spot on CNN or whatever, like it behooves you to support Nikki Haley at this point. So drop out and kind of throw your support and whatever money you have kind of behind her, because a win in New Hampshire, I mean, that seems to be this all kind of on the board for her at this point. I mean, like you said, I think she's down 30 points in South Carolina, which is the state where she's best known and was most popular. So New Hampshire kind of seems like the end of the road and the only opportunity for anyone to challenge Trump at all, which you can also see in Trump's attacks. Like they've started doing a lot more birther conspiracy stuff about her and kind of completely forgetting about DeSantis now.
That's the one thing. I mean, on the one hand, yes, Chris Christie should absolutely drop out and give his support to Nikki Haley. On the other hand, kind of like none of it matters.
Right.
So does he really have to, like, for the good of America, since it truly doesn't matter? The one thing I will say about Christie, like, it's so sad. Like DeSantis is, I think, or at least one of the polls I saw, like literally down to 5% in New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. So like if he drops out, he doesn't have any tokens to give to the next guy, right? But if he dropped out, very good chance that he would just half his people, maybe more than half his people, go to Trump. Mm-hmm. This isn't anti-Trump versus Trump. It's whatever they are, kind of friends of Trump. I don't know what it is. But the thing about Chris Christie is he's the one candidate in that race that I think you can make a decent argument. If you're for Chris Christie, you're not going to go to Trump. You must really not like Trump. It just, even though in some ways Chris Christie is very temperamentally like Trump, in, I think, very important ways, not like Trump, but still the kind of the ball buster and kind of bullying and all that kind of stuff. But he could conceivably, that's really the thing, is that he's holding what probably the only significant anti-Trump votes. Obviously, people can look at the polls, right? I mean, people. This isn't like when you release your delegates, right? He doesn't. Voters can make their own decision, and so that also kind of makes me wonder whether it even would matter. Who knows? I think fundamentally we know this does not matter. He's going to be the nominee, but history's unpredictable, and I do, as I said, he's going to be the nominee. But if he had to spend a non-trivial amount of the winter and spring, for lack of a better word, beating the crap out of Nikki Haley and attacking her constantly and being in a narrative of having to fight for dominance of the Republican Party, that matters because you if you're the incumbent president, you want to get started with the real race as early as possible. You want the other guy to be still, getting his own house in order. So we could have a surprise and it could mean something.
Exactly. And I think Trump, I mean, having him kind of locked into some semblance of a battle with a woman of color is just going to bring out his most heinous tendencies, which, to be honest, should be brought out. Like, people should be reminded of this stuff. I think part of the
Uh,
problem is that he has been too, like, off the stage, and people have forgotten just how
yeah.
bad he is.
Yep. Yep. No,
Uh,
I think that's right. Although at a certain level, you'd say, like, bring them out. He was basically doing a press conference outside of the courthouse yesterday, saying if the judges don't rule in his favor, he's going to, like,
Totally.
have his people blow stuff up. So it's out.
Yeah. But
But
better to keep it
yeah.
centered. He doesn't have the self-restraint not to. And that he's so undisciplined that if she's the main antagonist to him, like you say, that's where his energy is going. It's not going to go against Joe Biden. It's going to go against the immediate threat. And just fundamentally, the question is almost like, would you rather have Trump run unopposed or run against someone who almost has no shot of winning? Like, neither are, super thrilling options, but you're going to pick running against the person that's not a threat.
No, absolutely. He's delaying that inevitable thing as much as possible. Is all gravy for the Democrats. That there's always that line of people when people complain about a fractious primary. There are always people who say, like, "Oh, it's going to make the winner in fighting form." Like, no, it's not. No, it's not.
It's just
And,
stupid.
yeah, the one example people always point to is Hillary and Obama, and as a single data point, that has some logic to it. I think if you look at the internal dynamics of that year, he did well in the general, in spite of the fact that he had a highly fractious, divisive, often angry primary that was not only angry, but it's such ancient history now that it's easy to forget, pitted two critical Democratic constituencies against each other. You had two constituencies who felt that history was calling them for that year, the first woman president, with all that represents, and at the same time, the first African American president. And both of those, there was so much. And now, look, obviously, there were a lot of Black supporters of Hillary. There were a lot of, white female supporters of Obama. But still, there was that sense that you had two critical components of the Democratic coalition feeling, for very legitimate and profound reasons, this is the year. This is the year. And one of them had to come up short. In general, though, your nominee comes out of the primary bruised and mangled. That's not a help. You don't come out in fighting form. That's just not how it. That's not how it
Yeah.
works.
And the only kind of situation where that truism might actually be true, I think, would be with someone who is untested on the national stage, right? Who, like, doesn't.
Untested and unknown.
Right, who isn't
Yeah.
used to it and hasn't figured out their footing, and people don't know them yet, which is the opposite of this situation. So it's like you're telling me, Trump needs to go head to head with Nikki Haley to kind of be at the top of his game. Like Trump's game is where it's at. That's where it's always been. That's where it's staying until he is, carried off in shackles or disintegrates into the ground. So
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. Okay, well, I think we've
okay.
covered a broad range of I was going to say news products, but I won't go that far. In any case, hope you've enjoyed the first episode of the new year. We got a lot more coming, and we will talk to you next week with the next edition of the pod.
Yep. See you next week.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.